great.
So, good evening, Joe and Dan, and good evening anyone else who's out there watching us at the moment. We are talking tonight about Hong Kong, and we're talking tonight about Hong Kong because tomorrow is a very special anniversary. Tomorrow is the anniversary of the 3rd year of national security law. And I specifically wanted to talk to two people I know in Hong Kong, international people, and I know that both of you have collectively lived in Hong Kong for a very long time. And what I would like to do, first of all, maybe I ask you to do a short introduction for yourselves, explain how long you've lived there, why you live there, and what you do there. So maybe Daniel first.
Sure. Well, Jerry, thanks for having us join today, or I should say this evening, for the conversation. I am originally from Australia. I grew up in Melbourne, and I went travelling for the first time to Hong Kong in 1995, and then again in 1997 as a tourist. And in one of those trips, I visited mainland China as well. Mm-hmm. And the trips that, when I visited Hong Kong, that was pre-handover. And then when I went for a bigger trip, as Aussies do, you put on the backpack yes. and go on these long trips that no one understands why we do these long treks.
Except Kiwis.
Except Kiwis, yep, exactly. And my last stop before heading back to Melbourne, it was somewhat of a decision point as to whether to go back to Australia, was Hong Kong. And that was in 1999. And I've been in Hong Kong ever since. And before we hand to Joe, the connection to the lovely Joe Wong here on the call is we've known each other since university days at Melbourne Uni. We studied the same course together, and Joe was very kind to stay in touch. And then when I came to Hong Kong in 1999, we decided to open a business together and also be in life together. So there's no real boundary for us. It's all one and the same. So right. I'll hand over to Joe.
Okay, Joe, I believe that you're not actually a Hong Kong born and raised. You're Hong Kong by choice, right?
Yes. I was born in China, a city called Dalian. It's up in the northeast. And we moved to Hong Kong when I was quite young, around 6-7 years old. And my parents are like overseas Chinese. My mom was born in Indonesia, so she's Indonesian Chinese or Chinese Indonesian. My father was born in Burma or Myanmar now. So they or their parents decided to send them back to China to study because I think they want them to study Chinese and know their heritage. So we moved to Hong Kong when I think it's the opening up of China at that time.
At the end of the 70s.
Yeah. And so I live in Hong Kong since then. I study in Australia for year 12 and the university.
Let's not get too deep into that because we don't want to give your age away. We keep your age a secret. Daniel doesn't matter. But what the point was that you're actually born in China, right? And then you moved to Hong Kong.
Yes.
So the reason that we're talking now is because of this 3-year anniversary of national security law. So I want to really ask about national security law. And before we start, what I'd like to ask you is, both of you, maybe Joe first this time, Are there any significant differences for you? Because I know that both of you do business together. Are there significant differences in your day-to-day life, in your day-to-day business, between now and say 5 or 6 years ago, before the things started to go a little, in English we have this expression, they went a little pear-shaped in Hong Kong in 2018, 2019, and they started to go pear-shaped. But what you're doing now day to day, is it very different to what you were doing before day to day?
I think the huge difference was the 2019 riot was lasting for quite a long time, which I think we didn't expect.
Mm-hmm.
And it really affected our lives in terms of even weekends, we avoid going out, not seeing our friends much, because
Right.
we didn't know if it would turn out, a dinner would turn out to be an argument. And also you don't feel safe if you go out to places that they set up all these I don't know, barriers and all sorts of different things, and you don't even feel safe when you talk about things in the open, like on the public transportation. So that feeling was gone when the national security law was enforced, and you don't feel as much anxiety basically on your day-to-day life. So you go out a bit more. I guess that would help the economy and things like that. But I feel even today, for the friends that we didn't know, kind of where they're sitting in this whether they agree or not agree with the national law, national security law, we don't really talk about it that much. But personally, I feel a lot safer. That's what I'm trying to say. Yeah.
Is life pretty much the same now as it was in 2017 before this all started?
Well, if you take out the pandemic effect,
Oh yeah,
that did some damages to the economy.
yeah,
I think in terms of feeling safe, yes.
yeah. Okay, Daniel, is that the same for you?
Yeah, it is pretty much the same for me. I mean, to a degree, it's going to be because we're together all the time. So we're going to have a very consistent experience. But there are two things that I thought about as you asked the question, as Joe was describing that time. It's almost like going into a little time machine. You have these little flashbacks of what it was like at that time.
Yeah.
And there were two really distinct moments that just came to my mind. And I haven't thought about this in years, probably. The first one was during the disruption and the terrorist like activities.
Yeah, I call them protests. Joe calls them riots. Destruction and terrorism is probably okay.
Yeah. I think it's all of the above and more.
Mm-hmm.
I remember clearly about 10 to 15 minutes from where we live, we were taking our usual bus home, and we went up. Joe will know which story I'm telling here. We went up. We like to sit on the top deck, and we went up to the top deck, and literally the whole top deck of the bus was full of people that were all masked up. They didn't say this is not COVID masked up. This is masked up to hide their identity.
Yeah.
There was not one single person sitting there saying a word. It was completely orchestrated. It was bloody surreal, the whole thing. And then we just sort of looked at it. we go, okay, well, there's nowhere to sit, and this is weird. And then we went to stand downstairs. And then it stopped at a shopping centre that we go to. And then one by one, they all shuffled off the bus. And they didn't say a word. It was well organised. It was well structured. It was military in formation. And at that point, there were multiple points. But I remember at that point thinking, this is not good. Like these are not random. These are not random grievances, or I'm going to a street corner to protest about something I'm not happy with. This seems to be military style, well orchestrated, well trained patterns of behaviour that are being put into place to very, very clinically find a way to disrupt, and I'll take it further, actually destroy Hong Kong. So that was that one. And there were many instances like that. We've got many stories that talk to the concerns that we had during that time. And then the second one, which was almost the opposite of it, was the day after the law was passed, or the law was implemented. It was like that moment in The Wizard of Oz when she moves from the black and white into the colour. It was like suddenly everything was cleaned up. The city felt peaceful, and all the paraphernalia and all the propaganda and crap that was on, people's shop fronts, on things that they had grievances about, all of that was removed. No, all of that nonsense just went away. And I remember turning to Joe and saying on that day, "Isn't this great? Doesn't that just feel awesome that all of this sort of stuff is stopped, and we can get on. Now we can now get on, and Hong Kong can return to a real sense of peace and stability."
Okay. Can I take you back to the beginning of all of this? I live in Zhongshan on the mainland, but I know a lot of Hong Kong people here. And a lot of them have said to me that they were actually in favor of the initial round of protests. When it first started, there were some things that they were actually supportive of. The government was a little bit slow in developing social security, housing. A lot of different things were going wrong in Hong Kong. And they weren't being addressed by the Lam government at that time. Were you conscious of that? Were you aware of that? Was there a feeling that Hong Kong wasn't being well managed? I'm going back before the protests. So maybe Daniel first.
Yeah, to a degree, but it's all like anything, Jerry. It's all about in life, whether personal or in business or otherwise. So much about what you think you know depends on your perspectives and your own life experience. So it's very easy. It would be very easy. I understand. It'd be very easy if you're a Hong Kong Chinese and you don't have a lot of perspective outside of Hong Kong. It might be very easy to look at the problems of Hong Kong and see them as huge, like really, really significant. And some of them are, right? So that's one perspective. Whereas I think Joe and myself have enough of a local and a global perspective to put things in perspective and to know, to be able to sort of ascertain what is a real challenge, what is a real difficulty, and how does that relate to a standard or a well-being in terms of a life. When I came to, just to share with you in the audience, I came to Hong Kong with literally nothing. I was very, very lucky to know Joe, and together we built up. Together we worked really hard to build up everything that we have, and it was through hard work and through what being in Hong Kong offered. And I know people come from different circumstance, but I think there's so many great things about Hong Kong that sometimes I feel like certain samples within the Hong Kong local don't fully appreciate what Hong Kong provides. Now, one other perspective equal to leadership, were there problems with leadership in the Lam administration? Yes, there were, but there were problems way before her.
Yes.
And there were problems. There were already problems when the handover happened, because there were already things in place, little ticking time bombs that were in place to almost is the right word subvert, or almost to trip up Hong Kong from
Yeah, I get
moving.
that impression as well. It looks like the House of Lords in the UK is actually sitting back waiting for these ticking time bombs to erupt to say,
Yeah,
"We told you
yeah,
so."
yeah, exactly. So that's a
Yeah.
couple of perspectives. I'll hand to Joe.
Yeah. Joe, what did you think? Were any parts of the early stages of the protests? Now, I know people, and in fact, Nuri Vitachi is an online friend of mine, and Nuri was out there protesting with people at the time these things started. And he turned around when things started to get a little. He was saying, "This is not about Hong Kong protests anymore." He spotted that. Did you, Joe, as a Chinese person living and understanding the language, reading the newspapers, watching the TV, did you feel that there were issues that genuinely needed to be dealt with at that time? Going back to like 2017, 2018, before 2019?
Absolutely. The things that people um, were not happy with, and some of them still not happy with,
Mm-hmm.
especially the housing. I think
Mm-hmm.
they do have their reasons to protest. I'm not sure if people who don't live in Hong Kong, um, we have protests quite often about different
Yeah.
things, and protests about housing is just one of them. But this hasn't been dealt with for a long, long time. Ever since it's just getting worse. I don't know, ever since I started to pay more attention on the news.
Mm.
Um, but I think the only, not the only, but um, the things that I would point it out, the government hasn't done was the supply of the housing, of the public housing, hasn't been keeping up
Yeah. Yeah.
since probably the Donald Trump time. And also, I think the regulation of these subdivided flats, or those um, like caged type of
Yeah.
renting things, are not keeping up and not really, I don't know the legal word, implemented, or not
Mm.
really follow up. Um, I didn't even know there are any regulations about that, because if I own a flat that I could subdivide as many as I want, it's
Yeah.
almost like
You could
just do
turn one
whatever you
bedroom
want.
into two bedrooms and just put a
Oh,
little
it's
gyprock wall
worse.
between them.
Yeah,
Yeah.
like they divide into bunk beds and just, I don't know, put as many people as they want. That type
Yeah.
of regulation wasn't, I don't know, not harsh enough, I guess. That's
Yeah.
why it become worse and worse.
Mm.
Um, they almost like throw money on things that subsidize these rentals, and
Okay.
I think it just getting worse. You subsidize the um, tenant, and the landlord just, oh great, the government's paying, I'll add more
So I can
rent.
put the price up. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah.
that type of
One of
thing
the
they're not
main
doing well.
Jerry,
one.
sorry,
Yeah. Go
Jerry
on.
and Joe, just really briefly related to what Joe is sharing, and this is where people get confused when we start talking about things in extreme and binary ways.
Hmm.
So you might get a group of people talking about, let's say, words like freedom and democracy, and then you get a group of people talking about leadership and governance, and then you get a group of people talking about, policy, and then you get a group of people talking about the portfolio of interests to run a safe and a civil society. Well, let's and you can talk about national security as well, in reference to people feeling safe and and secure where they live. And this is where things get muddled up, because at the end of the day, when it comes to something like the housing issues in Hong Kong, let's say I can go to the street, I can protest to my heart's content. I can feel that I've got a freedom to protest to my heart's content. But if effectively none of that is actually landing through to policy, and none of that is actually shifting away from the underlying model of who really runs the ship. So if there's a significant group of people who are really running the ship, well, then you can call the government the what's the word, the type of governance. You can call it anything you like, but if the underlying model is the people that are controlling the ship, say in Hong Kong, are the property owners and the moguls, then
Yeah.
going to the street and protesting or trying to get policy through, even on the surface, isn't going to address that, because your underlying model is effectively being driven or sourced from a completely different power base or priority.
Yeah. One of the things that started the major protests happening was this extradition law. There was a murder, Taiwan was involved, there's no extradition between Hong Kong, Taiwan, mainland China, and they started. And to be quite honest, I do understand why people said, well, I don't want to go to, particularly if I'm in Hong Kong, I don't want to be arrested and then be extradited to China. I don't want an extradition between them. I get that. But most of this escalated after Carrie Lam said, okay, we're going to scrap that, or at least put that on hold, and then we'll discuss it further. Now, by this stage, Hong Kong is a form of democracy. It has a governance that allows people to vote on things. And she said, stop, we're going to stop this extradition thing. But then it got worse. Why do you think that happened? Joe, why do you think that happened? Why did it get worse after the main thing that started the protests was pulled back?
I think by that time, some external forces already identified this as great opportunity to stir something up. And
external forces. I can see Daniel laughing at that one.
And all the years of investing in the training and brainwashing, this is the right time to kick things in, because I remember at that time I was discussing this with some people over a meal, saying that, why are you against it? Someone, killed someone, right?
Yeah.
And don't you want this person to be in jail and stuff like that? The response was almost like purely emotional, and basically said, it didn't feel good, right?
Right.
But when you ask them about, have you read what's in this proposed law or whatever they're trying to propose, they say no. But I think most people who against it were, I don't even know the term that I think some of these social behavioralists will call, that they just being emotionally, I don't want to use the word manipulated, but almost like
influenced.
Like that. Influenced.
Yeah.
That's the whole feeling I've got at that time.
Right. So, Daniel, day-to-day life for you during the protests. So we're moving from before the protests now to during the protests. How was day-to-day life for you during that period of time?
Some of it Joe's already touched on things that we needed to navigate differently during that time. I didn't personally feel any concern for my own safety, but having said that, we know the doubles. Well, I say we know. I'm assuming our audience will have some idea of this, of the double standard that exists at times between a Western or a foreign-looking person and a Chinese-looking person.
Yep.
So there are different feelings about that in terms of going out into the street. So at no time did it disrupt us too much, but the issue was the unknown. I think the issue was, I remember clearly there was one day we were out in a district and we were, I think, finishing our lunch and walking around in a housing estate. And there was we know where the police station is around this housing estate.
Yep. Yep.
And then suddenly just people dressed in with their masks and their gas mask. They had all this gear that they wore, suddenly appeared, and they mobilised in front of the police station, and then they started to, which is what they did, they started to attack police stations. And the police in this instance were hilarious because some of them would get out with their megaphones and start playing music or telling them jokes, or it was just brilliant to completely use the situation. But
here's the quiet part out loud. Joe's quiet part.
Yeah.
So Joe, when this was all going on, how far away was all of this from where you live? Now, just for public disclosure, you actually live in the same apartment, right? You're in the same apartment now, just in different rooms.
That's right.
So how far away was this from where you live?
Well, the closest was 5 to 10 minutes drive from us.
No, not far, right?
Not that far. But even talking about, I think the emotional disturbance. I can tell you in one dinner instance that we were having dinner with some of our friends, and I think half are Westerners and half are Chinese, local Chinese. And just before we finished dinner, we saw people gathering, we saw rioters gathering with their, common and standard gears. And our friend saw them from the window above, and he saw them coming over, and you can visually see how scared he become.
Yeah, it was pure. It was pure panic. He was just in a state of
we
panic.
had to go.
We have
because,
to go.
His young daughter was with us, and you're talking about a grown Westerner that most of the times they don't attack them. You can see the impact that they have psychologically that get people. So that was I remember that very clearly.
But there was also, Jerry and Joe, it wasn't just about rioters, or in some cases terrorists, mobilising and causing damage, or attacking police stations, or just breaking stuff up. There was also, all around our place, not that far, there was significant amounts. I mean, this was all over Hong Kong. There was significant amounts of graffiti, like just the most foul forms of graffiti being put everywhere. And we'll probably get to this, Jerry, but that was, when we discovered that we could actually join a group and go out weekend to weekend and paint.
Well, that brings me to the next question. I know you volunteered, and how did that pan out for you? So, yeah, please continue.
It was awesome because you actually felt that you were doing something real and something really simple but important. It just felt so satisfying to paint over some of the crap that they were writing up. And frankly, we would go back to some places and the graffiti would appear again, and then we'd paint over it again, and then the graffiti would appear again and we'd paint over it again. And what also was great as a sort of a peripheral benefit, it led to the person who organised this group it led to a bunch of other interviews that I did with media, and that felt great too. That felt like we were representing something that was actually happening on the ground and giving people some perspectives without having to fall necessarily into a sort of a trough or a restricted dialogue of looking at it purely as a political discussion. Right. We could actually bring in perspective on what was happening on the ground, because the way it was being reported, Jerry, and I'm sure you well know this, the way it was being reported by some of the Western media, and particularly by some USA media outlets, was, I mean, you can imagine the hype that they were putting around it in terms of like, oh, Hong Kong falling apart and it's a war zone, and it was absolute crap. That wasn't what was happening on the ground. There were spot fires, but that narrative by certain media agencies, especially ones in America, that narrative was very, very deliberate, and it wasn't about getting under the skin of Hong Kong. It was very much about getting under the skin of the central government in mainland China.
It was about mainland China. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Joe, during the protests, when you were out there helping out, cleaning graffiti and clearing the streets, did you experience anything? And I've seen this on videos that I've watched where people were jostled, heckled. Now, I know that foreigners were pretty much left alone, except for one or two who were quite aggressive and assertive about it. But what about you as a Chinese person? Did you feel any discomfort with this?
So the group that we do this with, we usually do, so we have a bigger group do this cleaning things during the weekend. Right. And we make sure that we have a big group of people, and we have people that watch our backs, because there were people were harassing us, and sometimes the people who were watching our bags had to get the police. So that's why we make sure that when we go out, especially with girls, and sometimes people take their kids with them, we make sure that it's a big group. Yeah. So that's one thing. The other thing is when we do the cleaning, because near our home there are quite a bit, and we can't gather everyone every time. So there are a few people living close to us. We only have like 2, 3, 4 people at a time. So we make sure that we get up really early in the morning. So it's like we get up at 4 and make sure we were there at 5 and clean up everything before those rioters come back to attack us.
What was the general age group of the people who harassed you or heckled you?
From the 20s to, I think, I don't know, 60s, 70s.
So was it? I was kind of expecting you to say it was mostly young people, but that surprised me. That answer was a complete generational thing. People were. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
That's
it's
interesting.
not. Yeah. It's not. I don't know. There's no no age. I don't know, boundaries. That type of thinking.
Okay. So you would have both.
Yeah. I want to mention just one thing.
Sure.
I remember when I think I went to clean up with the bigger group when Dan wasn't around, and I prepared myself with a much lighter backpack. Like, you know, that when you hike up the mountain and you're, I don't know, last mile, you make sure you're carrying things very light. So I make sure I'm carrying a very light backpack, and my wallet and identity, those things are not in my backpack, and it's separate. And I usually carry a water bottle. I make sure it's there. so it can, you know, act as a defense weapon if anyone attack me, because in the group, when there were smaller groups cleaning, people just chasing them. So you need I was prepared to, you know, in case anything happened, I can defend myself and um, not getting my identity, I don't know, known, because at that time the way they online bully people was pretty terrible.
Mm. Since national security law came in, how quickly did things change, Daniel?
I guess it all depends how we think about change, I suppose. I never entirely understood, and perhaps I didn't do enough depth research into understand what the grievance was. But in my very brief review of national security law, it almost seems like there's a bunch of countries that there's a lot of countries that have a national security law. So it just seemed reasonable. I didn't understand entirely what the grievance was about. It seems to me part of the grievance was about how people were bringing very negative bias towards how they see China. And so, in answer to your question, um, I, I was really pleased to see it finally coming into play. And then, in terms of the significant change as a result of that, well, it is going to be significant in that things get cleaned up. But beyond that, I don't think it's played any. I really haven't put much thought into it, except to feel that Hong Kong feels safe again and it feels calm again. And that's what people who come to visit Hong Kong and the people who live in Hong Kong will say that consistently. They'll say it's the type of place that you can literally go anywhere and feel safe. I mean, how many cities in the world can you really say that about? I mean, in my own city, Melbourne, where I grew up, I mean, there are now increasingly a lot of places that people just wouldn't go. There's a lot of people that just wouldn't go out at night. I think Hong Kong has returned to that sort of pre-troubled time and feels feels like what it was. Feels just very
Yeah.
safe again.
It's true. The national security law, though, didn't change attitudes towards crime. It changed attitudes towards how national security is applied as opposed to security. So the police in Hong Kong have always done a great job. They've been very, very good. I'm a former police officer. I worked on riots and protests in the UK back in the 1970s, 1980s. I've seen some pretty horrific stuff. And I tell you, what I saw in Hong Kong was really very, very restrained police action. They,
Oh,
considering that they're an armed police service, they did an extremely good job. In the UK, we weren't armed. We didn't go into protests with guns, firearms. But in China, in Hong Kong, they actually went into those protests. And I have one question about we didn't get the People's Liberation Army, and we didn't get the armed police, the People's Armed Police, coming into Hong Kong. Why do you think? Oh, Joe, do you have an answer for this? Why do you think China did not send troops? I mean, I know there are troops in Hong Kong, but they didn't send troops or police to help the Hong Kong police. Why not?
I think they didn't fall in the trap, because I think they're trying to create Tiananmen Square incident 2.0.
Yeah.
Even the one tank picture, they can milk and abuse that for 30 years if if they send anything down here, I think it will destroy Hong Kong. I think the last thing mainland China central government wanted to do is to ruin Hong Kong.
Jerry,
Yeah,
sorry, Joe, Jerry, we've talked about this a lot as a couple, and I think Joe and myself have become even more aware of following global and local news since the troubles in Hong Kong. But I'll offer somewhat of a Western perspective. I sometimes, and perhaps this is too simplistic, but I sometimes think that some Western leaders and governments actually think that the Chinese are stupid.
Okay.
Right.
Do you want to elaborate on that?
Well, what I mean by that is it's blatantly obvious from if you look at it through a military playbook or a strategic playbook, it's so obvious what foreign interference was trying to do in Hong Kong to provoke the police to shoot on crowds, to create mayhem. The playbook was obvious of trying to get China to send in tanks and send in the military. The central government, the Chinese are too smart for that. They're not going to fall into that nonsense. And why? So why? Because the longer term strategic outlook and the longer term plan from a central government perspective, I mean, I'm talking about not just the 100-year plan. I'm talking about just the way they go about thinking in terms of policy and strategic projects. And there's no other country in the world that does it in the same way that China does currently. So they're going to look at what's happening in Hong Kong now. From certain perspectives, and even from local perspectives, in terms of what was happening in Hong Kong, yes, it's when you're living here and it's happening, it becomes that becomes the center of your narrative. But if you're the central government, you said this to me today, Joe. You said they've got so many other things that they need to focus on, right? That what was happening in Hong Kong, I mean, yes, that was a concern, but if you actually put that side by side with other things that they need to look at, they've got other things they need to look at. So, people, I just think there's this bias of people sometimes think that the Chinese and the leadership within the central government is stupid, and it's actually quite the opposite. In order, you know this better than probably we do, Jerry. The capability that's required and the things that you need to prove in order to get into that really senior leadership group, there's probably no other government where they have the same sort of path that you need to take in order to prove that. So it means that you're dealing with highly, highly, highly intelligent strategists. So I'm just offering other perspectives equal to, whether the government decides to act on something or not.
Yeah. I'm sure that what you're saying is absolutely correct. It's a meritocracy in China. It's a process of selection and election. And I was talking to some people in the local party congress today about that very, very topic, but that's for another day. Joe, a question for you. Have you noticed any improvements in the city in terms of either economic vitality? Now, I know that trade is up, but shipping is down. And I understand why that is, and we can come back to that later. But have you noticed any improvements or any changes in economic vitality, social governance, and this is the big one, I think, community solidarity? Have you noticed any changes in that?
I think you feel safe. That's psychological. that almost you can't measure. But anyone who studied Chinese history will know this pattern of almost all the strong and prosperous dynasties have long period of peace and stable environment for people to live and thrive, right? So when you have a stable and safe environment, that's almost like, plants needs soil and water. So I'm not an economist, that I don't really know the figures, but personally, you feel safe, and you when the national security law started, you already. I personally felt. I remember this clearly. You felt relieved and free again. So that type of things, I don't know how to measure, but that's how you feel about it. And you naturally look after people as well, because I don't know, we talk more to our neighbors, and when we saw people in the lift, so there are more, I don't know, chats and smiley faces, which is
that
great.
answers the community solidarity thing. Yeah, Daniel, what about
Yeah.
you? I know you're in business together. How did business change from before, during, to after the national security law protests?
Well, I think the national security law and uh, the the protests around the national security law, the sort of the interrelationship between those things was kind of, I'm going to say this a bit crudely, it was kind of an excuse. So I think this, this was brewing for a number of years. So it really, I think it really could have been anything in an attempt to disrupt and possibly destroy Hong Kong. So unfortunately, Jerry, I still think Hong Kong, even to this day, has been somewhat tarnished by what's happened. And it's terrible to say this, but in many respects, like COVID wasn't great, but in some respects, it depends what perspective you take. In some respects, COVID actually gave the Hong Kong government a little bit of breathing space to kind of get their house in order in reference to the police and security and all of that. So there was a tarnishing or sort of putting Hong Kong's name through the muddied water. And unfortunately, I think there's still a little bit of that happening today, but I'm not entirely sure it's primarily about national security, but there'll be other forces at play now to just pick other narratives to either target Hong Kong, or tomorrow the narrative will be about the Uyghurs, or tomorrow the narrative will be about Taiwan's independence. The story of the day will keep shifting, and there'll be other ones as long as that will continue to get under the skin of the central government and find all sorts of ways to stop China from evolving and progressing.
Yeah, we just lost you there for a moment. Do you think that's true, Joe, that it doesn't matter whether it's Hong Kong or wherever it is, China is always going to be picked on by the West about something?
Unfortunately, I agree with that.
Yeah. Okay. What does the future look like? Now, Daniel's just said there's still problems in Hong Kong. economic vitality is back. Hong Kong has is recovered economically. There's an interesting dichotomy that the trade is up, but the shipping is down, and a lot of that is due to the fact that there's a new port opened in Nansha, which is taking a lot of what used to be Hong Kong goods duty free, bypassing Hong Kong. So Hong Kong are selling things and they're being shipped direct from China. They used to come through Hong Kong and then be shipped. So the shipping is down, but trade is actually up. So I think Hong Kong economically has recovered. You've mentioned that it's recovered in terms of social community. There are still problems, but what does the future look like for you, Joe, in Hong Kong? Would you recommend Hong Kong as a place to visit as a tourist, do business? What do you think if someone is listening in and thinking, I mean, I did see someone just say, I'll just put this up, I would love to visit Hong Kong again. It was a very worrying time. Would you recommend people visit Hong Kong, do business in Hong Kong, or even think about coming there to live? Joe?
Definitely. Hong Kong is a place that almost it's so easy to do things that you want to do that in terms of setting up businesses or some people say Hong Kong is very expensive. It depends on how you want to live. And I think the nature of Hong Kong, that is a place that you make your own success, that type of spirit is still around and still very much encouraged. I think Hong Kong is a place that has been through quite a few, it's a startup term, pivoting moment. Like used to be I don't know, fishing village, and then you become a lot more trading things, and then you become a manufacturing of all these toys and garments and stuff like that. I think Hong Kong will find a way to move forward. It's a place of opportunities that it's yours if you want it. Because it's a place that's very easy to network with different levels of people. In many other bigger cities, it's harder to almost network, that you meet a diverse type of people and diverse in terms of nationality or businesses. It's very cheesy way to say it. It's a land of opportunities.
Okay. Daniel, from a foreigner's perspective, good place to live, work, and start up again?
From a foreign perspective and a local perspective, because I feel pretty much local Chinese, if not Chinese, in every sense of the word, except not being able to speak fluent Cantonese or Mandarin. I think Joe would support me in saying that I'm pretty much Chinese in cuisine and Chinese in heart and Chinese in soul. But I can look at it through both perspectives. But I would say I still think, and we're both pretty well travelled. There are places in the world that we haven't been to that I'd like to get to. But I would say with some confidence, I kind of feel like, Jerry, I should be working for the Hong Kong tourism, because I kind of feel like Hong Kong is still up there as one of the top 3 places in the world to live. And you know what's hilarious? I mean, it's not really hilarious, but even during the riots and the protests and the troubles, it was still a bloody good place to live during that time. So it's got this place has got everything. It's got everything. It's got enough to offer people an opportunity to be very successful. And by the way, we've now got the Greater Bay Area, so we've got an even bigger economic zone to go and do well and prosper. And by the way, in terms coming back to security, Hong Kong's a pretty good place because we've got our mainland China, our motherland, looking after us as well. So I feel great, Jerry, about living in Hong Kong, and I can't really see myself at this stage moving anywhere.
But wait a minute, you're saying that you've got the motherland, the mainland looking after Hong Kong now, and the protests were all about separating from Hong Kong. How come your view is so different?
Because I mean, to keep it simple, I mean, I could speak hours on that question. I think my view is very different because I choose to read. I choose to have conversations with people like you, Jerry, and get your perspectives and listen in on your show. I have wonderful daily conversations with my dear wife, Jo Wong, who's incredibly, as you know, Jerry, incredibly smart in her own right. And I happen to be open to multiple perspectives and not just believe everything that I read through the media. It's actually like the simplest way of viewing it is it's just called critical thinking. So and you have to be very, very careful today because of social media. I mean, there is just so much bullshit floating around. So you've got significant amounts of crap floating around on social media that goes unchecked, and at the same time you've got censorship from places that claim to talk a lot about freedom and democracy. Yet censorship exists within a lot of the news agencies and newspapers. There's editorial, and then there's people that are behind the editorial. So that's censorship in it as well. So and then you've got digital distraction. You've got people that are constantly glued to their mobile phones and constantly wanting to distract themselves with fair amounts of crap and digital candy as well. So you've got multiple forces that are pulling away from each other. One is digital distractions equal to dumbing people down, plus social media, plus people not reading and not doing, and the education not doing enough to help people grow their perspective. And then what you end up with is the perfect storm globally to effectively manipulate people. It's not that difficult. I mean, this is without becoming completely George Orwellian. I mean, this is the sort of stuff that was discussed in George Orwell's 1984, and this is sort of playing out, isn't it? And
I think it's more Brave New World, actually. There was a Twitter conversation going on today about whether George Orwell was a warning or a playbook. The wonderful Anna Chen was in that, Madam Meow. If you ever follow someone that's worth following, was Orwell a warning or was Orwell a playbook? I thought that was a brilliant statement.
Look, Jerry, I'll just to say this, and I'll hand back to you. It's like, how many types of biases are there? There's far too many for anyone to truly get on top of or conquer.
Yeah.
But if someone comes up to you and says, "Hey, person A is this way and that way," I would say there are a significant number of people that will just accept that judgment on face value and not question it. Either because they don't have the capacity to question it, or they're too lazy, or they just prefer to judge. And I think this happens on, you mentioned today, Joe, to me, this happens on a me level, individual level. This happens on a we level, an us level, which is a team level. And it also happens in an organisational or a community level. There's this constant wanting to just buy into very narrow views without wanting to learn or open yourself up to other perspectives. And that, Jerry, I'm sorry to do a shameless plug of Jerry's take on China, but you're one of a number of people that are opening up people's eyes as to other lenses and other perspectives about China, and I think it's just bloody wonderful.
Thanks, and I'd like to give you a shameless plug too. You run a business called Make Meaningful Work, right? And where can people find you? Let's plug that in.
Well, Joe, do you want to talk to that?
You do it.
All right. Okay. I think there's two things people can do. They can either just type www.makemeaningfulwork.com and have a little look at what we're up to. And on the homepage, they'll see a book that we published in 2021 from memory, Joe. And I guess the main stimulus for the book, Jerry, was really about doing years and years and years of work in big corporations and in many cases multinationals, and just seeing the enormous amount of waste that people spend on projects that do not have meaning.
Mm.
And so we thought, geez, that, as you know, Joe's very, very passionate and interested in both health and anything to do with sustainability and reducing waste. And so we thought we would 10 years ago go on this journey of working out, could we develop a framework and a tool, and we have developed a tool called practice spotting, that is actually designed. The whole reason it exists is to help people grow their perspectives, and B, take responsibility for micro actions towards some form of improvement. So growing perspectives, trying to look at those perspectives and connect dots around a sense of a meaning that they may not know about, and then be able to take some associated responsibility of micro action related to that. And that can easily apply to anyone of any age, and it can apply into individual, team, or business, or government, or an education. We happen to be doing a lot of work, which is awesome, with kids at the moment, because the earlier you can address helping kids be able to look at things more critically and from multiple perspectives, the better.
Okay. I just wanted to put this comment up and ask you both. This represents New Zealand, and I have to be honest. Much as I'd love to, I've never been to New Zealand, but I have lived in the UK. I have lived in Australia, and my comment on this is that this is true for those countries. Hong Kong SAR and mainland China have more freedom and democracy than other countries. Joe, what do you think?
I think you need to look at democracy from different perspectives again. The way the Western media portray democracy is on the voting level, which I kind of thinking it's almost like a magic trick that for you on the surface, but it doesn't really help, I don't know, real people's lives in terms of all these infrastructure or give you environment to grow as citizens. I recently learned about why one of the reasons why the Communist Party can win the civil war after the Second World War. One of the big reasons is that the Communist Party, well, they are very poor, and the KMT also, the economy wasn't good, and they couldn't because the inflation was so bad, they couldn't afford to pay the soldiers. But Communist Party can't really pay their soldiers too, and a lot of the times the people share their food with them, so they can survive. I think the ultimate intention of doing things for the people, that's why you get people's support. That makes a huge difference. Whether you call it democracy or whatever term you or label you put on top of that, the true actions count. it doesn't really matter what you call them.
Mm. Did you see the comment that Steve Weaver put up? Make meaningful work from sleepwalking to sparkle is on his Kindle.
Thank you.
Steve and I are good mates online. We haven't actually met, but he's coming to China soon, so we will. And he's actually been on this channel chatting with me on a couple of occasions. Great guy. Thank you, Steve. It's good. Now you get to see the people who wrote it. It's actually in my bookshelf around the corner as well. And I think probably in the interests of transparency here, I should say that we know each other and have been, I think it's more than 6 months. It's probably about 8 or 9 months we've been communicating regularly. And we're planning to do something together, but I'm too busy. So I think that's going to be something that comes up in the future. Now, I wanted to ask you about, Daniel, about this freedoms. You were born and grew up in Australia, right?
Yeah.
And now you choose to live in Hong Kong. Where do you feel the most freedom?
I feel an equal amount of freedom in both places.
Okay.
But again, it's, I'll make that as a general comment. But the major dependency is always the context. So there are certain contexts when I'm in Australia where I don't feel as free, and very often the thing that influences how I feel, if we want to use the word freedom or flexibility, is very dependent on the people. So for example, when I cross the border, let's say from Hong Kong to mainland China, and I have to meet with an immigration officer on the mainland China side, because on the Hong Kong side you don't even have to deal with the person. You just use your Hong Kong ID card and away you go through the gate. No intervention required at all from a human. But I can say years and years of travelling into the mainland, I have never once felt that they have grilled me or interrogated me or made me feel like a criminal, or made me feel like I'm some sort of national security risk. It's like they might look at my photo and look at me and look at my photo and look at me, and then away they go and stamp my passport and I'm through and I'm in. And it feels great. But yet I've been to countries, and I'll include the UK in this and the US in this, and in some respects even Australia, where the border control has made me and Joe, sometimes together, sometimes on our own, literally feel like criminals. Right. And you think to yourself, particularly in certain border control, and it's very dependent on the particular officer. But there are certain officers where they actually play these power games. And I got to a point, Joe will remember this, I got to a point one time, I think it was in San Francisco. It was question after question after question after question. And I'm a reasonably patient guy, but I got to a point where I leant forward and I said, can I ask you a question? Can I ask what is with and why are you asking so many of these questions? I mean, we're here to come and enjoy our time in your country, right? So it got to a point where it moves away from feeling like it feels very free-flowing and free to a place where you start to feel accosted and you start to feel like you're being interrogated. And that's the interesting part about generalizing between one country and another.
Yeah, it's difficult.
I've never ever felt not free in Hong Kong, and I've certainly never ever felt not free in China, ever.
No, neither have I. Just as a point of interest, my wife and her mother and father arrived in Australia 10 days ago. They're traveling together. My wife's younger sister lives in Australia with her husband, and they went to visit. So they got in with, between the three of them, 5 suitcases. And included in those suitcases was, of course, a lot of the local delicacies from here for the daughter, who hasn't had the Zhongshan almond cakes or whatever it was that they had in their bag. And what's this? It's tea. What's this? It's tea. What's this? It's tea. What's this? It's tea. What's this? It's a teapot. My wife was telling me the story that the immigration, or this is not immigration, this is a quarantine officer, just started laughing and said, "Okay, you're free, you can go." Still laughing because it's 5 or 6 different teas, and then what's this? It's a teapot. My father-in-law took a teapot to Australia.
Good on him. Good on him.
Yeah.
Exactly. But Jerry, just to add a final point on your question is, free or not free, humans are going to play a really important part in how other humans feel.
Of course.
If you want someone to feel respected, then just respect them. And if you don't, well, then you don't. But I can't generalize about a country because that's ignorant. But there are certain instances where, it just hasn't felt great necessarily in our travels, and we've got a couple of other stories in our travels where we just felt we were not treated respectfully.
Yeah, but it's not China. It's not our countries. I was born and grew up in the UK, moved to Australia. I actually feel relatively free in Australia, but I'm a little nervous about the national security laws they have, particularly because I'm in China and I'm quite positive about China. So that does worry me a little bit. We're getting towards the end of this, and I would just like to let's bring us back to what the purpose of today's conversation was about. The anniversary of the 3rd year of national security law. One last question, Joe. Is Hong Kong a better place today, a different place today, or a worse place today?
Definitely better, because safety is almost the most important thing. Without safety, you can't do anything else. And stability, I think it's very important. I encourage, and I don't know, people just take a look at the history of China. Which period that has lots of war and instability, people can live happily. You can't find any of those, and I want to add a little bit on the psychological freedom that people feel in terms of all these new politically correct type of boxes that people given to themselves. You can't say so many things in Australia when we sometimes when we talk to Dan's sister. There are people that buy into all these I don't know, advertising models or lifestyle things that advertisements sold to people, that people have no financial freedom. How can you, if you don't have that type of freedom, it doesn't really matter what kind of political system you're in. That basic foundation of human life. Sometimes we forget that these artificial little prisons that we put ourselves in.
In China, I think they call it the 3 pillars. You must have housing, clothing, education. And if you don't have those 3 pillars, then you have no human rights. Daniel, a question that you might be able to answer here. Sabine just asks, have the rents come down in Hong Kong in recent times?
It depends where. I mean, every district has its own rental arrangements, and there's public housing here, and there's significant amounts of property companies that that they're property companies, and it's a business. So it depends where. I coming back to Joe's earlier point, perhaps from about an hour ago, I still think Hong Kong has a lot of work to do in reference to making housing and rental more affordable.
Yeah.
And so this is where I think the central government has it right. No one big business person is bigger than the government. Right. So when they kind of put Jack Ma in his place, I think that was a good thing. Right. You can't have big business dictating to the government how things should be, and people lose. The richer people become, the more they lose perspective. And so, I think Hong Kong property can exist where people can profit from that, but we need significantly more effort to put people into affordable housing. Hong Kong is such a wealthy place. There's absolutely no reason why anyone in this city should be living in poverty. It's ridiculous. Ridiculous, in my view.
Okay. Are there still triads operating in the new territories? Hung Tua asks that question. Do you know anything about that?
Only me and Joe, Jerry.
Yeah, yes, your criminal gang. Yeah.
I don't know. I honestly don't know. Probably. I don't know. Joe, do you have a thought on that?
I have no idea. Probably.
Yeah, I'm sure everywhere in the world there are criminals. I don't think there's any doubt about that. Even China has criminals.
Yeah, of course. Wow,
believe.
really?
Yeah.
He says sarcastically. I'm more honestly, in reference to the triad question, I actually get a little more concerned by the 70, 75, 80-year-olds that are boarding buses in Hong Kong. Do not get in their way, because they're tough and they will bump you out of the way and they'll prod you with their umbrella. So they're probably more concerning to me than the triads.
In Chinese mainland, it's the elbows, the sharp elbow trying to get onto a bus.
Yep.
And the bedrat in Denia.
The only thing I will add to the triad things is they only kill each other. So I'm not concerned about that. I'm not one of them, so I wouldn't concern.
Yeah, I don't think it affects the daily lives of people who live in Hong Kong. What criminal gangs are going on and doing. And in fact, the last I heard, most of the criminal gangs in the new territories were more involved in smuggling stuff into China.
Yeah,
things like Australian lobsters were coming in shiploads, but smuggled in illegally. So there's a big market here in China for things that you can't always get. And that's what the criminal gangs were doing.
Jerry, just a thought. I wanted to mention this before. Is coming back to models of leadership and models of governance. We are dealing with some very significant global problems at the moment. We're dealing with climate catastrophe. We're dealing with food shortages. We're dealing with financial inequality. We're dealing with broken economic and political models. When I see in Australia, when I see a Labor government, which is intended to be a left-wing government, spending literally billions of dollars on nuclear submarines to protect us against some sort of mythical or phantom enemy called China. It absolutely, on the one hand, it infuriates me, but on the other hand, I also think of it as just the most banal and stupid forms of decision making I've ever seen. We have what China is attempting to do is provide another way. You don't always have to agree with their policy decisions, but at least they're attempting to provide another option equal to models that lead us, one would hope, towards more peaceful futures. Now, if people want to keep subscribing to the old ways and they keep wanting to implement or be part of models that are causing damage, well, good luck to you. But I just think that whether it's China or any other country, and it absolutely peekaboo, war is big business. That's right. I think we need to be part of endeavours and momentum towards other models that are more peaceful, and that's why I think the things can get really blurry when you start talking about China, because things start to become very political, and they don't need to be when you can start to just take a more objective view and just look at it purely from a model or a narrative or a leadership perspective equal to big problems that we're all facing.
So the bottom line is changes are happening, and they're a little slow, but they're changing for the better. Is that where you're coming from with that? I know that in Australia, the AUKUS thing was just, for me, disastrous.
Yeah, I think so. The more optimistic days, I'd like to think so. But I have days where I just I knock my head and I think to myself, how can these leaders just be that stupid?
I agree. That's another topic for us to get into, the what the leaders of the Western countries are doing with their largest trading partner beggars belief. So we're coming to, we've got an hour and 20 minutes, and I said we'd try and get this under 90 minutes. Joe, do you have any final closing comments about life in Hong Kong today? Anything you'd like to add to the things that you've just already said?
Not really. I think not everyone, but a lot of people trying to do their best to contribute to this society, and some people trying to destroy things. I think we need to remember that it's very very easy to throw away things. It's much harder to build something. So yeah, think about things from different perspectives before you do things to destroy. Yeah, the impact can be huge.
And Daniel, anything you'd like to add?
Re Hong Kong, re the future.
Yeah.
It's in human hands. It's somewhat in human hands, and it's somewhat not in human hands, because nature is finding a way to bite back pretty hard. And at the end of the day, humans are not going to win that. Nature's going to win. It's going to prove to win. So we can start to work with nature and support the ecosystem, or we can work against it. Currently, we're still working against it. So I'm in favour of enlightened leadership. I'm in favour of models that speak to a healthy future. And I think that's a huge driver and a motivator for make meaningful work, reduce damage. And I'm a huge proponent, and I think that's why we've become friends, Jerry. I think we're both, Joe and myself, are huge proponents of people who continue to open doors and open perspectives and continue to be curious and ask questions. And I think that's a very healthy approach as you get older, because it's very easy. It's very, very easy to become fixed and closed-minded about things. And right now, as much as there's a sentiment towards looking at China in very old ways, pre-China opening up, the interesting thing about China is they're one of only a few countries that actually continue to open up, and they continue to open up new models, continue to open up new relationships, and they're pursuing models of peace, and that's very, very encouraging.
It's only the people that don't want China to open up that are causing the troubles. I don't know about you guys, but I'm getting a lot of interference now. It seems like the signal has weakened, and I'm getting interference on your voices when you're talking to me. So I think it's probably a good time to wrap this up, for me anyway. Steve Weaver has just said exactly what I was going to say. It's an enjoyable discussion, always is when I talk to you guys, But this is really important. It is great to hear first-hand accounts from people who lived there before, during, and after those events of 2019. And I love the positivity that's coming out of this. Thank you very much. And I just hope everything goes the way it is continuing to go. I know there are new steps. There's a new national security law coming into place in 2024, which will protect even further against infiltration, as opposed to what they're doing now is protecting against what happened. They're going to protect against and stop it from happening again. So I think that's a good thing. So one last comment from me is thanks everybody, over 80 people watching us this evening. It's a great turnout for my little channel, and I'm very happy with that. Thank you for the questions that came in, but Joe and Dan, thank you very, very much.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, our pleasure, Jerry. Thank you so much, and big hug, and thanks for